There is a young man on a road. It is somewhere in the early 1300s. The road is muddy. The young man is tired. He has been walking for many days, perhaps weeks. He has crossed rivers on small ferries. He has slept in barns and on the floors of monasteries. He carries a leather satchel containing a change of clothes, a small wooden cross, a letter of introduction from a local priest, and a handful of coins his family scraped together to send him on his way. He is going to become a doctor. He does not yet know what that means. He has heard stories. There are great universities in the south of Europe, in Italy, in France, in Spain, where men gather to study the human body and the writings of ancient physicians. He has been told that a doctor can wear a long robe lined with fur, can ride a horse, can speak Latin and Greek, can be received in the courts of kings. He has been told that a doctor can save lives. He has also been told, by less optimistic voices in his village, that a doctor can kill. That medicine is a strange and dangerous art. That the church watches over it carefully. That the body is full of mysteries and the wrong cure can damn a soul. He walks on. In a few weeks, if all goes well, he will arrive at a city, perhaps Bologna, perhaps Montpellier, perhaps Salerno on the southern coast of Italy. He will find lodging. He will register at the university. And he will begin the long, strange, demanding journey toward becoming what his world calls a physician. To understand what he is doing, you have to understand what most people did in the year 1300. In medieval Europe, the vast majority of people, perhaps 9 out of every 10, were peasants. They lived in small villages, on land that belonged to a lord. They farmed. They raised animals. They were born in their village, they married someone from a nearby village, they died in their village. They did not travel. They did not read. They knew the priest, the miller, the blacksmith, the lord's bailiff, and a few dozen other people. That was the world. When they were sick, they did not go to a doctor. There were no doctors in their village. There were no doctors in the next village either. A doctor, a real, university-trained physician, was a creature most peasants would never see in their entire lives. When a peasant was sick, they went to a wise woman, or a monk, or a herbalist, or a barber. The wise woman knew which plants to gather, which prayers to say, which charms to whisper. The monk in the local monastery had a small infirmary where he might offer rest and a tincture made from the garden herbs. The herbalist sold dried roots and seeds. The barber, in addition to cutting hair, would also pull teeth and bleed his customers when they felt unwell. The bleeding was thought to remove bad humors. The barbers were busy, and often the sick person simply lay down on their straw mattress and waited. They prayed. Their family prayed. The priest came and read words over them in Latin. If they were lucky, the illness passed. If they were unlucky, they died. Many people died of things we today consider trivial: a cut that became infected, a stomach bug, a winter cold that turned into pneumonia. This was the world the young man on the road was leaving behind. His family, somehow, had decided he was destined for something different. Perhaps he had shown an early talent for reading. Perhaps the local priest had taught him a little Latin. Perhaps an uncle, a generation back, had been a clerk in a town and had told stories about the wider world. Whatever it was, his family had pooled their resources. They had sent him on this road. He carried, in his satchel, the entire hope of 3 generations. He walked on. He arrives, eventually, at one of the great medical schools of medieval Europe. The oldest was at Salerno, in the south of Italy. By the 11th century, Salerno was already famous as a place where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars studied medicine together. The school had been founded, according to legend, by 4 physicians, a Greek, a Latin, a Jew, and an Arab, who came together to share their traditions. By the 12th century, Salerno was producing the most respected physicians in Europe. There was even a Salernitan tradition of women practicing medicine, including a famous figure known as Trotula, whose writings on women's health were copied and read across Europe for centuries. But by the time our young man is on the road, in the early 1300s, the center of medical learning has shifted. Salerno is in decline. The great universities of the new era are Bologna, Padua, and Paris. Montpellier in southern France is rising rapidly. The model of medical education has been formalized. There are curricula. There are degrees. There are professors who hold endowed chairs. The university itself is not a single building, the way a modern university is. It is a community of teachers and students scattered across rented rooms in a particular neighborhood of the city. The students rent lodging from local families. They eat in small inns. They attend lectures in the front rooms of houses, or in the halls of churches, or sometimes in the open air. The professors stand at a small lectern, reading from a manuscript, while the students sit on benches or on the floor and take notes on wax tablets. The university charges fees. Some of the fees go to the professors. Some go to the city. Some go to the church. The young man pays what he can. He may, if he is fortunate, find a wealthy patron, a bishop, a nobleman, a guild, willing to support him in exchange for future service. He may also work as a clerk or a tutor in the evenings to supplement his income. Many medical students live in a state of cheerful, perpetual poverty. They share rooms. They share books. They share meals. They argue about Galen until the candles burn out. This is the world he has joined. The medical curriculum of a medieval university is, by modern standards, very strange. First, it is almost entirely theoretical. He will spend years reading books before he ever touches a patient. The books are ancient. The most important is by a man named Galen, a Greek physician who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era and worked in the Roman Empire. Galen wrote prolifically. Over 100 works survive, and his system of medicine dominated European thought for over 1,000 years. Galen, in turn, built upon an even older tradition. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical writings attributed to Hippocrates of Kos and his followers, from the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era, formed the foundation. Then there were the Arabic physicians, whose works had been translated into Latin in the 12th century. The greatest of these was Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, whose canon of medicine was perhaps the single most important textbook in the medieval university. Avicenna's canon was so comprehensive, so well organized, so authoritative, that it was used in European medical schools for 600 years. So the young man will read Galen. He will read Avicenna. He will read Hippocrates. He will read the Articella, a compilation of shorter works that served as the standard introduction to medicine. He will read commentaries on these works by his own professors. He will memorize long passages in Latin. He will be tested by oral examination, the professors firing questions at him in front of his fellow students, and he answering, in Latin, by quoting from memory. What he will not do, for most of his training, is dissect a body. For much of the medieval period, human dissection was extremely rare. It was not formally forbidden by the Church, That is a common misconception, but it was hedged about with restrictions and difficulties. Bodies were hard to obtain. The bodies of executed criminals were sometimes available. The bodies of the unclaimed dead, in hospitals, were sometimes used. But dissection was a special event. A famous professor at Bologna in the early 1300s, named Mondino de Liuzzi, wrote an anatomy textbook based on a small number of actual dissections he had performed. His book, the Anatomia, became a standard reference. But most students learned anatomy from books and from animal dissections. The internal arrangements of the human body were known, in considerable detail, but they were known mostly through reading. This will change, slowly, over the centuries. By the 1500s, dissection will become routine. The great anatomy theatres of Padua and Bologna will be built. Andreas Vesalius will publish his magnificent anatomical illustrations in 1543. But the young man on the road, in 1300, is far away from any of that. He is learning a medicine that lives mostly in the mind. His days have a rhythm. He wakes before dawn. The bells of the nearest church ring for the morning service. He attends, perhaps, because he is expected to. Religion and medicine are not separate things in his world. The physician is, in some ways, a kind of priest of the body. He must understand the order of creation. He must respect the soul. He must pray for guidance. After the service, he goes to his first lecture. It might be in a private house, in the front parlor of one of the professors. There are no seats. The students stand or sit on the floor. The professor sits in a chair, with a manuscript open before him on a small wooden lectern. He begins to read. He reads a passage from Galen, perhaps. Then he stops. He explains the passage. He gives examples. The students scribble on their wax tablets, or, if they are wealthier, on small sheets of parchment. The professor reads another passage. Explains it. Reads another. This goes on for hours. At midday the young man eats his main meal. Bread, perhaps cheese, perhaps a thin soup. If he is lucky, a small piece of meat or fish. He drinks watered wine, because the water in medieval cities is often unsafe, and the wine, while heavily diluted, kills the worst of the impurities. In the afternoon, he returns to his lodging. He reads. He copies passages from borrowed manuscripts. Manuscripts are precious. A single textbook might cost more than he earns in a year. So students share. They read aloud to each other. They sit in groups, 3 or 4 students sharing a single book, arguing over what a particular sentence means. In the evening, there is sometimes a public lecture or a disputation. A disputation is a kind of formal debate. A professor poses a question, for example, whether the heart is the seat of the soul, or the brain, and 2 students argue opposite sides, citing authorities, quoting Galen and Aristotle and Avicenna, trying to demolish each other's positions. The audience listens, takes notes, sometimes laughs at a particularly clever turn of phrase. The disputations are intellectual theater. They are how medieval medicine sharpened itself. At night, he returns to his shared room. He says his prayers. He blows out the small tallow candle. He sleeps on a thin mattress filled with straw. Tomorrow, he will do it all again. This is not a brief course of study. A medieval medical student will spend, typically, 7 to 10 years at the university. He will progress through stages. First he must master the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. This is the standard liberal arts education of his time. He will earn a Bachelor of Arts before he is permitted to study medicine proper. Then he begins medical studies. He will spend 5 or 6 years on the Galenic and Hippocratic corpus. He will learn the theory of the 4 humours, the doctrine of the elements, the principles of pulse reading, the techniques of urine analysis. He will study materia medica, the names and properties of medicinal substances. He will study astrology, because in his world the position of the stars and planets is believed to influence the body's humours. He will study the seasons, because each season has its own pattern of illness. At the end of his studies, he will face examinations. They are oral. They are public. Other professors attend. The candidate is asked to defend theses he has prepared. He may be asked to comment on a passage chosen at random from a textbook. He may be asked to diagnose a hypothetical patient. He may be asked to argue against propositions chosen specifically to trap him. If he passes, he is granted a license to practice medicine. He may also be granted a degree, Doctor of Medicine, which carries great prestige. The degree comes with ceremonial robes, with the right to be addressed as Magister, with the right to teach at universities. He is, by the standards of his world, an extraordinarily educated man. He is also, by modern standards, almost entirely wrong about how the human body works. He believes in the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. He believes that illness is caused by an imbalance of these humours, and that treatment consists of restoring the balance. He believes that the position of the planets affects the body. He believes that certain illnesses are caused by miasma, bad air, rising from swamps and rotting matter. He believes that the heart is the source of body heat and that the liver makes blood. He has read about the humours and the planets and the miasma in books that are themselves 1,000 years old, written by men who never used a microscope, never knew about bacteria, never imagined the circulation of the blood. And yet he is not a fool. His training has taught him to observe, to listen, to touch. He has learned, in his years of reading and arguing and watching his professors, to take a careful history from a patient, to examine the body, to consider many possibilities, to use the medicines available to him in the doses that experience has shown to be safe. He has learned that some illnesses respond to rest and a good diet, that some wounds, kept clean, will heal, that some pains can be reduced by herbs that act on the body. He knows things that work, even if he does not always know why they work. He sets out from the university with his degree, his books, his instruments. He is 25, perhaps 30 years old. He has spent 1/3 of his life learning his craft. Ahead of him are the long working decades of a physician. He may serve a town. He may serve a noble household. He may teach. He may write books of his own. He may save lives. He may also kill people, without meaning to, by treatments that we now know are useless or worse. He is the medieval doctor. He is walking again, now. A different road. The road away from the university. He wears a robe lined with fur, the kind he had only heard about in his village. He rides a small horse. He carries, in his saddlebag, the books he has accumulated, Galen, Avicenna, the Articella, his own notes from years of lectures. He is going to begin his practice. Somewhere, in a town he has not yet seen, there is a patient lying ill on a straw mattress. The patient does not yet know that a real, university-trained physician is coming to attend him. The patient knows only the local barber, the wise woman, the prayers of the priest. That is about to change. For better. For worse. For something. Tomorrow night, we will look at how he understands the body. The four humors. The theory that shaped 1,000 years of medicine. The strange, beautiful, wrong model that worked surprisingly often and failed beautifully when it failed. But tonight, rest. Good night. There is a small room. It is somewhere in a medieval town, perhaps Florence, perhaps Avignon, perhaps Cologne. The room is on the upper floor of a stone house. The doctor lives here. He has set up his consulting space. There is a desk with a few books on it. There is a small chair for the patient. There is a window that lets in the morning light. On a shelf behind the desk, there is a brass flask shaped like a teardrop. The flask has a name in his world. It is called a matula. It is used for examining urine. We are going to spend tonight with the doctor in this room. We are going to look at how he understood the body. The foundation of medieval medicine is a theory called humorism. The theory goes back to ancient Greece. Its earliest version is in the Hippocratic writings, around 400 before the Common Era. Its most famous version is in the works of Galen, 600 years later. By the medieval period, it had become so standard, so accepted, that no medical text could be written without assuming it. The theory is this. The human body contains four fluids, called humors. They are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Blood is produced in the liver and flows through the veins. Phlegm is produced in the brain and the lungs. Yellow bile, also called choler, is produced in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. Black bile, also called melancholy, is produced in the spleen. In a healthy body, the four humors are in balance. Each does its work. The body functions. The mind is clear. The temperament is even. When the humors fall out of balance, illness results. Too much blood causes one set of symptoms. Too much phlegm causes another. Too much yellow bile causes a third. Too much black bile causes a fourth. The doctor's job is to diagnose which humor is in excess or deficiency, and to restore the balance. The theory is elegant. It explains, in a unified way, the great variety of illnesses the doctor will encounter. It connects the body to the larger world, because each humor corresponds to one of the four elements: blood to air, phlegm to water, yellow bile to fire, black bile to earth, and each element corresponds to one of the four seasons, and each season has its associated illnesses. The whole of the cosmos is woven together. The body is a small version of the universe. To understand the body, you must understand everything else. The theory also explains personality. Each humor is associated with a temperament. A sanguine person has a lot of blood, cheerful, optimistic, ruddy-faced, full of life. A phlegmatic person has a lot of phlegm, calm, slow, steady, not easily excited. A choleric person has a lot of yellow bile, angry, ambitious, sharp-tempered, decisive. A melancholic person has a lot of black bile, sad, thoughtful, withdrawn, prone to brooding. The words for these temperaments survive in modern English. We still call someone sanguine, or phlegmatic, or choleric, or melancholic. The humors are gone, but the personalities they described remain in our language. This is how deeply the theory ran. In this little room, the patient sits in the chair by the window. The doctor begins his examination. He does not have the tools a modern doctor has. He has no thermometer. He has no stethoscope. He has no blood pressure cuff. He has, instead, his eyes, his ears, his fingers, and his nose. And he has the brass urine flask. First, he looks at the patient. He notices the color of the face. A red face suggests excess blood. A pale face suggests excess phlegm. A yellow face suggests excess yellow bile. A dark or sallow face suggests excess black bile. He looks at the eyes. Are they bright or dull? He looks at the tongue. Is it coated? What color is the coating? He looks at the skin. Is it dry or moist? Is there a rash? Then he takes the pulse. Pulse reading was a high art in medieval medicine. The doctor would place 2 or 3 fingers on the patient's wrist and feel for many qualities. Was the pulse fast or slow? Strong or weak? Regular or irregular? Hard or soft? Was it like a wave, or like a string, or like a hammer? Each quality was associated with a particular humor and a particular condition. A skilled doctor could spend many minutes on the pulse alone, his eyes closed in concentration, feeling for the subtle textures of the blood moving beneath his fingers. Then comes the urine. The patient has been instructed, when arriving, to bring a sample of his morning urine in a small flask. The doctor pours it into the medulla, the brass examination flask, and holds it up to the light. He looks at the color. He looks at the clarity. He looks at any sediment that may have settled at the bottom. He may smell it. He may, in extreme cases of diagnostic uncertainty, taste it. Tasting was rare, but it was done. Diabetes, for example, was identified in ancient times by the sweet taste of the urine. Medieval doctors knew this. They wrote about it. Some of them tasted. The colors of urine were classified in elaborate detail. There were charts, sometimes circular, with 20 or more shades of yellow, brown, red, and white, each one associated with a different condition. Pale, clear urine suggested excess phlegm. Dark, thick urine suggested excess yellow bile. Cloudy urine with white sediment suggested a particular kidney condition. The doctor would consult his chart, or recall from memory, what each color meant. He may also feel the patient's stomach, listen to the breath, examine wounds, check the temperature of the skin with his hand. But the pulse and the urine are central. A medieval doctor was, in some sense, a connoisseur of these two fluids. He could spend his entire career refining his sensitivity to their qualities. Once the doctor has made his diagnosis, too much of this humor, too little of that, he prescribes treatment. The treatments come in 3 broad categories. First, there is regimen. This means changes to the patient's daily life. Diet, sleep, exercise, the air he breathes, the company he keeps. The doctor will give detailed instructions. Eat less meat. Drink wine warmed with spices. Sleep with the window open or closed. Avoid bathing during a full moon. Walk in the morning, but not in the heat of the day. Each instruction is calibrated to the patient's particular humoral state and the particular season of the year. This part of medieval medicine, surprisingly, is not all wrong. Eating less meat, getting more sleep, drinking warm liquids, getting fresh air, these things often do help. A great deal of medieval doctoring consisted of telling people to take better care of themselves, and a great deal of it worked. Second, there is medicine. The pharmacopoeia of the medieval doctor is enormous. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of substances he can prescribe. Herbs gathered from the fields. Roots dried and ground into powders. Animal parts, the bile of an ox, the heart of a chicken, the powdered horn of a deer. Mineral substances, sulfur, mercury, ground stones. Exotic imports from the East, pepper, cinnamon, ginger, opium. Many of these substances are useless. Some are harmful. Mercury, prescribed for syphilis in later centuries, would slowly poison the patient. Bloodletting, applied to almost any condition, weakened patients who needed strength. The famous remedy of theriac, a complex compound containing dozens of ingredients including viper flesh, supposedly an antidote to all poisons, was no antidote to anything. But some of the substances worked. Willow bark, chewed for pain, contained the active ingredient that would eventually be isolated as aspirin. Foxglove, in the right doses, did slow the heart and help with certain conditions. Opium poppy did relieve pain. Honey, applied to wounds, did help them heal. The medieval doctor had real tools mixed in with the useless ones. He used them, often skillfully, without knowing exactly why they worked. Third, there is what we today would call surgical or physical intervention. This includes bloodletting, which we will spend more time on in a moment. It includes cupping, applying heated glass cups to the skin to draw out humors. It includes purging, giving substances that caused vomiting or diarrhea to remove excess humors. It includes the application of leeches. The leech was a respected medical instrument. A doctor would keep a jar of live leeches. He would apply them, individually, to the parts of the body where humors needed to be drawn out. The leech would attach itself, drink its fill of blood, and drop off. The doctor would gather it back into the jar. Leeches were reusable. A good leech might serve a doctor for years. Of all the medieval treatments, bloodletting is perhaps the most famous and the most controversial. The theory is straightforward. If illness is caused by excess blood, then removing some blood will help. Bloodletting was used for an extraordinary range of conditions: fevers, headaches, fatigue, depression, swelling, gout, dizziness, palpitations, almost anything. It was also used preventively. Healthy people might be bled regularly, as a kind of maintenance, to keep the humors in balance. The technique was specific. The doctor, or, more often, a barber surgeon acting under his direction, would make a small incision in a vein. The arm was the most common site. The blood would flow into a small bowl. The doctor would watch the blood. He would feel the patient's pulse during the procedure. He would stop when he had taken enough, sometimes a few ounces, sometimes much more, in extreme cases enough to make the patient faint. There were elaborate diagrams showing which vein should be cut for which condition. A vein on the left arm for one purpose, on the right arm for another. A vein at the temple for headaches. A vein at the ankle for women's complaints. The diagrams were called bloodletting charts. They were studied carefully and followed precisely. Bloodletting, by every modern measure, was usually harmful. Patients lost blood they needed. They became weaker. They were less able to fight off the underlying illness. Many patients, including kings and popes, died sooner than they would have because of bloodletting. George Washington, far in the future, would die in 1799 partly because his doctors bled him repeatedly during what was probably a throat infection. The practice continued, in some places, into the 19th century. But, and this is important, bloodletting was not stupid. It was based on a coherent theory. It was practiced by men who had spent decades learning when and how to apply it. It sometimes seemed to work, because patients sometimes recovered after being bled, and the doctor and the patient both attributed the recovery to the bleeding. The theory was wrong. The practice was, often, harmful. But it was not without method. It was a mistake made by intelligent people working within the framework they had. This is one of the strange lessons of medical history. Smart people, doing their best, with the knowledge available to them, can be very wrong for a very long time. There is one more piece of the medieval medical theory that needs explaining, and it will sound stranger to modern ears than anything we have discussed so far. The medieval doctor believed in astrology. He believed that the stars and planets influenced the human body. He believed that each part of the body was governed by a particular sign of the zodiac. He believed that the position of the moon affected the timing of treatments. He believed that certain medicines should be gathered, prepared, or administered under particular planetary conditions. This was not optional knowledge. It was core curriculum. A medical student studied astrology along with anatomy and humoral theory. He learned to cast horoscopes. He learned the medical implications of each celestial configuration. When he prepared to bleed a patient, he would check the position of the moon. If the moon was in the wrong sign, he would postpone the bleeding to a more favorable time. It is easy, from our distance, to mock this. It is easy to say that medieval doctors believed in nonsense. But consider what they were doing. They were trying to connect the body to the larger cosmos. They were trying to find patterns. They were trying to bring the chaos of human suffering into a system that could be understood, predicted, controlled. The astrology was wrong, but the impulse behind it was the same impulse that drives modern science, the impulse to find order in the world, to discover that things which seem random are actually following rules. When the medieval doctor consulted the stars, he was not being lazy or superstitious. He was being thorough. He was applying every tool he had been taught. He was treating the patient with the full weight of his learning. That his learning was largely wrong is a separate question. The dedication was real. We should end this part with a kind of honesty. The medieval doctor knew a great deal. He knew how to take a careful history. He knew how to examine a patient. He knew the names and properties of hundreds of substances. He knew how to set a broken bone, how to clean a wound, how to deliver a baby in difficult circumstances. He knew the seasons of illness, which diseases came in winter, which in summer. He knew the patterns of dying. He had watched many patients live, and many die. He had learned, from experience, what tended to help and what tended not to. What he did not know was almost everything we now consider fundamental. He did not know about bacteria. He did not know about viruses. He did not know that hand-washing prevents the spread of disease. He did not know that the heart pumps blood in a continuous circulation. He did not know that the brain is the seat of thought. He did not know about cells, about DNA, about the immune system, about hormones, about nutrition in any modern sense. He believed many things that were wrong. The four humors, the influence of planets, the miasma theory of disease, the idea that the womb wandered around the body, the idea that semen was a refined form of blood. And yet he was the best his society had. He stood between his patients and complete ignorance. He brought to the bedside the accumulated learning of 1,000 years. He was often kind, often skilled, often genuinely useful. He saved lives, even with his wrong theories, because some of his treatments worked and because the human body, given rest and care and time, often heals itself. He was a man doing the best he could with what he had been given. That is, in the end, what almost any practitioner of any era can claim to be. In the little room, the patient has gone home. The doctor cleans the medulla. He puts away his books. He looks out the window. The light is changing. Afternoon is coming. He will see other patients today. He will examine other urines, take other pulses, prescribe other regimens. He will earn his fee, perhaps a few coins, perhaps a chicken, perhaps a promise of work to be done later. He will go on, doing his slow, careful work, in a world that has no idea what is wrong with it. Tomorrow night, we will follow him through an actual day. Patient by patient. House by house. We will see what his work really looks like, hour by hour. But tonight, rest. Good night. It is dawn, on a Tuesday in October, somewhere in the year 1340. The doctor is already awake. He has lit a candle. He is sitting at his desk, in the upper room of his stone house, reading. The book is a commentary on Avicenna, written by one of his old professors at Bologna. He returns to it often. There is a passage about the diagnosis of fevers that he has not quite settled in his mind. His wife is downstairs, beginning the morning. A servant girl tends the small fire. The smell of barley porridge rises through the floorboards. Outside, in the dark street, a man is calling out the wares he has for sale: fresh bread, salt fish, a few late apples from the country. The doctor closes the book. He has patients to see today. The first patient arrives just after the bells of the cathedral have rung for the early morning service. He is a wealthy merchant. He has come accompanied by a servant who carries a small leather case. The case contains a flask. The flask contains the merchant's morning urine, carefully collected at first light. The merchant is in his 50s. He has been complaining, for several weeks now, of a heaviness in the chest. A kind of pressure. It comes and goes. It is worse after large meals. It is worse when he climbs stairs. He has come to the doctor because his wife has insisted. The doctor takes him into the consulting room. He motions for the merchant to sit in the chair by the window. He asks the questions he has been trained to ask. How long? How often? What makes it worse? What makes it better? Are there other symptoms? Has he had similar complaints in the past? Does anyone in his family suffer the same? The merchant answers. The doctor listens. He does not write things down, not yet, but his memory has been trained for this. He will remember what the merchant has said. Then he examines. He takes the pulse. The pulse is faster than he would like. It is also, he notices, slightly irregular. There is a little stumble in it every few beats. Not a strong stumble, but a stumble. He looks at the face. The merchant's face is fuller than it should be. The eyes are slightly puffed. The complexion is high. The doctor notices that the merchant is sweating slightly, even though the room is cool. He examines the urine. He holds the medulla up to the morning light. The urine is darker than it should be. There is a faint sediment at the bottom, a thin, cloudy layer. He thinks for a moment. In our world, of course, we would suspect heart disease. We would suspect that the merchant, who eats too much and exercises too little, is developing the early stages of a condition that will, in 5 or 10 years, kill him. We would order tests. We would prescribe medications. We would talk about diet and exercise. The doctor, in his world, cannot do any of this. He has no concept of heart disease as we understand it. He does not know what cholesterol is. He does not know what arteries are. Really, he knows the word, he knows arteries exist, but he does not know they can become narrowed or blocked. What he knows is humoral theory. So he interprets the pulse, the urine, the puffy face, in those terms. He concludes that the merchant has too much blood. The blood has become thick and hot. It is straining the heart, which is the source of body heat. It must be cooled and thinned. He prescribes a regimen. Less meat. More vegetables. Wine watered more heavily. Avoid heavy exertion in the heat. Sleep with the window open. And he recommends a single bloodletting to be performed the next day to remove some of the excess blood and cool the system. The merchant nods. He has heard such advice before. He will follow some of it. He will probably not follow the part about less meat. He leaves a coin on the desk. The doctor sees him out. In 10 years, the merchant will die of what we today would call a heart attack. The doctor's diagnosis was wrong. His treatment was useless. But the merchant felt that he had been examined carefully, that his concerns had been taken seriously, that he had been given a plan. There is, in this, a kind of medicine that is not nothing. The second patient is brought in mid-morning. He is a young man, a stable boy, about 16. He has fallen from a horse. His left arm is hanging at a strange angle. He is in pain. He is trying not to cry. The doctor does not need humoral theory for this. He needs his hands. He sits the boy down. He gently removes the boy's tunic. He examines the arm. He can see that the bone of the forearm is broken. There is no protruding bone, that would be much worse, but the alignment is wrong. The arm is bent where it should not be. He gives the boy a small amount of opium, dissolved in wine, to dull the pain. He waits a few minutes for it to take effect. He talks to the boy quietly. He tells him about a similar case he treated last year. He tells him the bone will heal. He tells him to take a deep breath. Then he sets the bone. He pulls the boy's arm straight, sharply, in one motion. The boy cries out. The doctor's wife, who has come in to help, holds the boy's shoulder. The bone, with a small sliding sensation that the doctor feels through his palms, returns to its proper position. He bandages the arm. He uses strips of linen. He places small splints of thin wood along the arm to keep the bone aligned. He ties everything firmly but not too tightly. He shows the boy how to wear a sling. He gives the boy more wine with opium for the pain. He gives the boy's father, who has been waiting in the kitchen, instructions. The arm must be kept still. The bandages must be checked daily. If the fingers begin to swell or turn blue, the bandages must be loosened. If the bandages become wet, they must be changed. He should bring the boy back in 2 weeks. The father nods. He pays the doctor with 3 small coins and a basket of eggs. The arm will heal. In 6 weeks, the boy will be using it again. In 3 months, the boy will be back to his work in the stables. The doctor has done something here that genuinely helps. Setting bones is one of the things medieval medicine actually did well. The technique was old. It had been refined over centuries. The doctor performed it competently and with care. This too is medieval medicine. In the late morning, a servant comes running. He is from the household of a wealthy widow who lives at the edge of town. She has been taken suddenly ill. The doctor must come at once. He gathers his bag. He takes his most important books, small portable volumes, not the great folios in his study. He puts on his outer robe. He follows the servant through the streets. The widow's house is a fine one. There are tapestries on the walls. There are real beeswax candles burning in the hallways. The widow is in her bedchamber, lying on a high bed with curtains. Her daughter and a servant woman are with her. The doctor approaches the bed. He bows slightly. He greets the widow. She is pale. She is breathing shallowly. She has been complaining, the daughter says, of pain in the chest and the left arm. She felt faint, and then she lay down, and now she is having difficulty breathing. The doctor examines. He takes the pulse, it is weak, faltering. He listens to the breath, it is rapid and shallow. He looks at the face, the lips are slightly blue. He recognizes the seriousness of what he is seeing. He does not know exactly what it is. In our world, this is a heart attack in progress. He calls it a sudden imbalance of the vital spirits in the heart. He sends the daughter for warmed wine. He sends the servant for hot stones wrapped in cloths, to be placed at the widow's feet. He himself takes from his bag a small bottle of a tincture, a mixture of various herbs, prepared by an apothecary, used for failing strength. He gives the widow a few drops on her tongue. He sits beside her. He holds her hand. He talks to her quietly. He tells her that she must rest, that her body is strong, that with care, the imbalance will pass. It will not pass. She dies a few hours later. The doctor is still there. He has stayed. He has not been able to leave. He has watched her breathing slow and falter. He has watched her color fade. He has watched her, finally, go still. He prays with the family. He helps them arrange for the priest. He writes out a brief account of his observations for the family records. He accepts a payment that is more generous than he had expected, a piece of silver plus a length of fine cloth. He walks home through the early afternoon streets. He is tired. This is medieval medicine too. The watching, the helplessness, the being there. On the way home, he stops at the apothecary's shop. The apothecary is a man he has known for years. They are not friends, exactly, there is a certain professional distance, but they respect each other. The doctor prescribes, the apothecary prepares. Their work fits together. The shop is small. It smells extraordinary. Dried herbs hang from the ceiling in bunches, mint, lavender, rosemary, sage, dozens more. There are jars on shelves containing more exotic substances, powdered amber, dried beetle shells, crystals of strange salts, the dried bodies of small lizards. There is a mortar and pestle on the counter. There is a small set of scales. The doctor needs a few things. He needs more of the tincture he gave to the widow, he wants to replenish his supply. He needs an ointment of lead and frankincense for treating skin ulcers. He needs a particular kind of dried root that he uses for difficult cases of fever. He and the apothecary talk while the apothecary measures out the ingredients. They discuss the news from the south. There are rumors of a strange illness in some Italian port cities, though no one is sure what it is. They discuss the price of pepper, which has gone up again because of trouble somewhere along the eastern trade routes. They discuss a recent edict from the local bishop concerning what physicians are permitted to charge. The doctor pays. He receives his goods, carefully wrapped. He continues home. The apothecary is, in many ways, the doctor's silent partner. Without the apothecary, the doctor would be unable to prescribe anything. Without the doctor, the apothecary would have far fewer customers. The two professions evolved together, over centuries, into a careful division of labor that would, eventually, become the modern split between physicians and pharmacists. In the afternoon, the doctor sees his poor patients. This is a tradition in his town. Every Tuesday afternoon, between the 3rd and the 6th hour, the doctor sees patients who cannot afford to pay. They come to a small room attached to the cathedral, where the canons have provided a chair and a table for him. The patients line up in the corridor. They wait. He sees each one in turn. The cases today are typical. A woman with a persistent cough. A small child with a fever that comes and goes. A man with a sore on his leg that will not heal. An old woman with pain in her joints, especially when the weather is cold and damp. A young pregnant woman, brought by her mother, who has been bleeding lightly. He examines each one. He prescribes what he can. He gives some of them small jars of ointment from his own supply, without charging. He gives advice. He listens. Most of these patients will not get better because of anything he does. They will get better on their own, if they get better. Or they will not get better. He knows this. The 30 years of his life he has spent learning his craft have taught him, among other things, the limits of his craft. But he comes. Every Tuesday. He sits in the cold little room and he sees the patients who line up. This is part of being a doctor in his world. There is a certain expectation, partly religious, partly civic, that a doctor will give some of his time to those who cannot pay. The church watches. The town watches. A doctor who refuses this work would soon find that. Wealthy patients also stopped coming to him. But it is more than that, too. The doctor himself, on his good days, believes in the work. He believes that to serve the suffering is what medicine is for. He believes that even if he cannot cure them, he can attend to them. He can listen. He can give what comfort his presence and his knowledge allow. He sees 9 patients in 3 hours. He goes home. He arrives home as the bells are ringing for vespers. His wife has prepared a meal. They eat together, a thick soup of beans and barley, a piece of cheese, bread, a small cup of wine. They talk about the day. He tells her, briefly, about the widow. She had heard already. News travels fast in the town. After the meal, he goes back upstairs to his study. He has notes to make. He keeps a journal of his cases. He writes down, for each patient he saw, the symptoms, the diagnosis, the treatment, the outcome where known. This journal will be valuable to him. He will return to it. He will compare cases. He will notice patterns. Over the years, his journal will become his most important book, more valuable to him, in some ways, than even his copy of Avicenna. This is one of the quiet marvels of medieval medicine. The doctors who kept records, who paid attention to their actual patients, were doing, in their own small way, a kind of clinical science. They were collecting data. They were correlating symptoms with outcomes. They were learning. They could not yet build the great edifice of modern medical knowledge on these observations, because they lacked the theoretical framework. But they were doing the underlying work. He writes for an hour. The candle burns down. He reads, briefly, from a book of devotions. He prays. He goes to bed. Tomorrow there will be more patients. Tomorrow he will rise, and read, and see them, and do his slow, careful work, and write it down at the end of the day. This is his life. This is what he chose, on that road, all those years ago. In the dark room, the doctor sleeps. His wife sleeps beside him. The candle has gone out. The fire downstairs has been banked. The street outside is quiet. Far away, somewhere across the rooftops, a dog barks once and then is silent. Tomorrow, the day will begin again. He will rise. He will read. He will see his patients. He will go to the apothecary. He will visit the sick. He will do what he can. He does not know that, far to the south, a ship is sailing toward Marseille that carries something terrible in its hold. He does not know that within 10 years, the world he lives in will be transformed by an event so catastrophic that the entire framework of his medicine will be tested, found wanting, and changed. Tomorrow night, we will follow him into the plague. We will see what the medieval doctor did when the Great Death came. We will see what survived, and what did not. But tonight, rest. Good night. It begins, as it often does, with a ship. In October of 1347, 12 Genoese trading galleys arrived at the harbor of Messina, on the island of Sicily. They had come from the east, from the Black Sea, where they had been trading at the city of Caffa. The ships were in a strange state. Many of the sailors were dead. The ones still alive were dying. Their bodies were covered with strange black swellings, at the neck, at the armpits, at the groin. The swellings split open and oozed pus and blood. Those infected died within days. The authorities at Messina, alarmed, ordered the ships out of the harbor. It was too late. The disease was already ashore. Within weeks it was moving across Sicily. Within months it was in mainland Italy. Within a year it was in France, in Spain, in England. Within 3 years it had killed somewhere between a third and a half of the entire population of Europe. It would be remembered, by the people who survived, as the Great Mortality. We today call it the Black Death. And the medieval doctor was about to face the greatest challenge his medicine had ever encountered. The disease arrived in his town in the spring or summer of 1348. There had been warnings. Travelers brought stories. Refugees from the south brought worse stories. Some doctors and wealthier citizens fled the towns and tried to wait out the contagion in country estates. Others stayed. The doctor we have been following, we may imagine, stayed. The first cases were terrifying. A patient would feel sudden chills, fever, a deep weariness. Then the swellings would appear. They grew rapidly, sometimes to the size of an apple. They were exquisitely painful. The patient would develop dark blotches on the skin, from the bleeding beneath. Many would begin to vomit blood. Most would die within 3 to 5 days of the first symptoms. The doctor, faced with this, did what he had been trained to do. He examined patients. He took pulses. He looked at urine. He tried to diagnose within his humoral framework. Was this excess blood, or excess yellow bile, or some new corruption of all the humors at once? He tried his treatments. He bled patients. He prescribed regimens. He gave them tinctures and ointments. He lanced the swellings, a brave and dangerous act, since the swellings released material that we now know was teeming with bacteria. None of it worked. The patients died. The doctor saw, in the first weeks, a pattern that broke his theory. The disease did not care about the patient's humoral balance. It killed sanguine merchants and melancholic monks. It killed the choleric young soldier and the phlegmatic grandmother. It killed people who had been bled. It killed people who had not been bled. It killed people who followed strict regimens and people who indulged in every excess. Humoral theory could not explain this. He kept trying. He had nothing else to try. He went, day after day, into the houses of his patients. He examined them. He prescribed what he could. He prayed with them. He watched them die. It is from this period that we get the famous image of the plague doctor. You have seen the image. A figure in a long black robe that reaches to the floor. Gloves of leather. A wide-brimmed hat. And, most famously, a beaked mask, a curving leather snout that extends in front of the face, hollow inside, with two round eye openings made of glass. The mask is one of the most haunting images in the history of medicine. People who see it for the first time often assume it is a piece of demonic theater, something invented for horror films, or for masquerade. It is real. It was an actual piece of medical equipment. A note about timing: the famous beaked mask was not common in 1348. It was developed later, probably in the early 1600s. Charles de Lorme, a French doctor, is often credited with the design. The medieval doctors who first faced the Black Death in the 14th century did not have it. They wore simpler protections, often just thick cloth and herbs held to the face. But the principle of the beak was already in medieval thought. The beak was hollow. Inside the beak, the doctor packed dried herbs and spices, lavender, mint, camphor, cloves, rose petals, ambergris. The theory was that disease was spread by miasma, bad air. The pleasant-smelling herbs in the beak filtered the bad air and protected the doctor from infection. This theory was wrong. The plague is spread by fleas, by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, sometimes also airborne in its pneumonic form. The herbs in the beak did nothing against the bacterium. But the beak, and the long robe, and the gloves, and the closed surfaces of the costume, these did provide some real protection. They kept fleas off the skin. They prevented direct contact with infected fluids. The doctor who wore the full costume was, by accident, somewhat better protected than the doctor who did not. The right answer for the wrong reason. The whole history of medicine is full of these. While the doctor worked, the wealthy fled. This is one of the bitter facts of the Black Death. The people who could leave, left. The people who could not leave, stayed and died in larger numbers. The countryside was somewhat safer than the city, fewer rats, fewer fleas, less crowding, and those who had country estates retreated to them. Cardinal princes fled their bishoprics. Wealthy merchants closed their town houses and disappeared. Kings and queens isolated themselves in their most distant castles. Some doctors went with their wealthy patrons. They were paid to. Their job was to keep particular important persons alive. They followed the wealthy into the countryside and waited. Other doctors stayed. They had public commitments. They had patients who could not move. They had families. They had a sense of duty, or shame, or fatalism. The famous Italian writer Boccaccio, who lived through the plague in Florence and whose book The Decameron is one of our best sources for the experience, describes both groups, the ones who fled and the ones who stayed, without much judgment. People did what they could. People died regardless. Many of the doctors who stayed, died. The plague did not spare physicians. Some communities lost their entire medical class. Florence, after the plague, had a critical shortage of trained doctors that lasted for a generation. Our doctor, the one we have been imagining, may have lived or died. Many of his real counterparts died. The death rate among doctors was probably higher than the average, because doctors went, day after day, into the houses where the dying lay. There was no protection equivalent to modern infection control. There were no masks of fabric that filtered viruses. There were no gloves of nitrile. There was only the long robe, the leather gloves, the herbs in the cloth. If our doctor lived, it was perhaps because he had some natural resistance, or because the fleas happened not to bite him, or because the strain of the bacterium in his town was slightly less aggressive, or simply because he was lucky. Survival was largely luck. When the plague finally passed, and it did pass, slowly, irregularly, with terrible local recurrences for decades, European medicine had been shaken. The humoral framework, which had been unchallenged for 1,000 years, looked considerably less convincing. It had not predicted the plague. It had not explained the plague. It had not treated the plague. Thoughtful doctors, in the second half of the 14th century, began to question things they would not have questioned before. Some of them turned to contagion theory, the idea that disease spreads from person to person by some kind of physical transmission. The Italian doctor Gentile da Foligno, who died of the plague in 1348, had been one of the first to suggest something like contagion in his late writings. Others followed. The Veronese physician Girolamo Fracastoro, writing in the 1500s, would propose the existence of tiny invisible seeds of disease that passed between people. This was 100 years before microscopes proved him right. But the seed of the idea that disease might be a physical thing, transmitted from body to body, began to take hold. Quarantine, as a practice, was born from the plague. The word itself comes from quironta, 40, the number of days that ships from infected ports were required to wait offshore at Venice before being allowed to dock. Quarantine worked. It is one of the few public health measures of the medieval period that worked clearly and immediately. By the late 1300s, towns across Europe were experimenting with isolation, with mandatory waiting periods, with the closing of gates against infected travelers. Hospitals, too, evolved. The medieval hospital had originally been a place of charity, a place for the poor, the elderly, the homeless. After the plague, hospitals began to specialize. Some became plague houses, dedicated to caring for the sick during outbreaks. Others became more like the institutions we recognize today, places of organized medical care. Public health, as a civic responsibility, began to emerge. Towns appointed health officials. They kept records of deaths. They enforced sanitation. They monitored markets. They made rules about burial, about begging, about the movement of people during epidemics. These were the first stirrings of what would, centuries later, become public health agencies. The plague, in short, killed the old medicine slowly. It did not die at once. The humoral theory persisted in the universities for centuries. Bloodletting persisted into the 19th century. But the great certainty of the medieval system had been broken. After the Black Death, European medicine was looking, however slowly, for something new. While medicine was being shaken by plague, surgery was being shaped by war. The medieval period was a time of constant warfare. There were the Crusades. There were the dynastic wars between France and England, including the long conflict we call the 100 Years' War. There were the wars of the Italian city-states, the campaigns of the German emperors, the conflicts of Spain and Portugal against the Moors, the endless small wars between barons. War meant wounded men. Wounded men needed treatment. The surgeons of the medieval period were, generally, a class apart from the university-trained physicians. They learned by apprenticeship, not by reading Galen. They were, in many places, organized into guilds with the barbers, the famous barber surgeons, who did everything from hair cutting to amputation. The physicians looked down on the surgeons. The surgeons resented the physicians. But the surgeons learned things the physicians did not. A surgeon on a battlefield, treating arrow wounds and sword cuts and crushed limbs, learned what worked and what did not. He learned how to stop bleeding. He learned how to extract embedded objects. He learned how to clean wounds, how to bandage them, when to amputate, when to leave alone. He developed techniques that, while crude by modern standards, were genuinely effective. He saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. The French surgeon Henri de Mondeville, writing in the early 1300s, advocated for cleaning wounds with wine. He was right. The alcohol in wine has some antiseptic effect. He could not explain why it worked, but he had observed that wounds cleaned with wine healed better than wounds left dirty. The Italian surgeon Theodoric Borgognoni, a generation earlier, had advocated for keeping wounds dry rather than encouraging them to produce pus. This was against the conventional wisdom, which held that laudable pus was a sign of healing. Borgognoni had observed otherwise. He was right. He could not explain why. But his patients did better than the patients of his colleagues. The surgeons, in their hands-on practical world, were quietly accumulating real knowledge. By the end of the medieval period, surgery had advanced in ways that medicine had not. The great surgical textbooks of the 14th and 15th centuries, by Guy de Chauliac, by John of Ardern, were treasure houses of accumulated technique. They would be used, and built upon, for the next several centuries. The physician, with his Galen and his humors, had been correct in theory and wrong in practice. The surgeon, with his cruder tools and lower status, had been wrong in theory and often right in practice. The history of medicine, from this point on, would be the slow reconciliation of these two strands, the theoretical and the empirical, into something better than either. By the year 1500, the world the medieval doctor had known was passing. The printing press had been invented. Books could be reproduced cheaply. Medical knowledge could spread faster than the slow hand-copying of manuscripts had ever allowed. The university curriculum was changing. New texts were being added, Arabic works newly translated, ancient Greek works newly recovered, the writings of contemporary physicians made available to a wide readership for the first time. Anatomy was being transformed. The dissection of human bodies, once rare, was becoming routine. Anatomy theaters were being built. Andreas Vesalius would publish his great work, the De Humani Corporis Fabrica, in 1543. Its illustrations would show the body as no book had ever shown it before. Galen's anatomical errors, many of them based on the dissection of animals rather than humans, would begin to be corrected. The discovery of the New World, in 1492, had brought new substances into the European pharmacopoeia: tobacco, cinchona bark, ipecac, sassafras, eventually the potato and the tomato as food crops. New diseases, too. Syphilis swept Europe at the end of the 15th century, terrifying and disfiguring, and pushing doctors to develop new treatments and to think about disease in new ways. The Reformation, beginning in 1517, would shake the religious framework within which medieval medicine had operated. The question of what the soul was, of how the body related to it, of who had authority over the sick, these were all reopened. Medicine, freed slightly from religious supervision, would begin to look at its problems with fresh eyes. By the late 16th century, the great medieval synthesis was crumbling. By the 17th century, with the discoveries of William Harvey on the circulation of the blood, and the invention of the microscope, and the chemical investigations of Paracelsus and his successors, a new medicine was being born. It would take another 200 years for it to fully overthrow the medieval system. Bloodletting persisted. The four humours persisted in popular thought even longer. But the era of the medieval doctor, the man in the long robe, with his Galen and his Avicenna, his urine flask and his pulse reading, his confidence that the universe was an ordered system that could be understood by careful reading and careful watching, that era was ending. He had done his best. He had carried medicine through 1,000 years of difficulty. He had served his patients with the tools he had been given. He passes from history slowly. Not in a single moment. Not with a single death. He fades, generation by generation, into the more recognizable figure of the early modern physician, and then into the physician of the Enlightenment, and then into the doctor we would now recognize. But he was real. He existed. He sat by bedsides we cannot now imagine. He held hands we cannot now touch. He did what he could. There is a young man on a road. It is somewhere in the early 1300s. The road is muddy. The young man is tired. He is going to become a doctor. He does not know what he is doing. He cannot know. He cannot know that the books he will spend a decade reading will be wrong, in their fundamentals, in ways that he cannot suspect. He cannot know that the disease that will define his generation has not yet arrived. He cannot know that the cures he will prescribe will sometimes save and sometimes kill. He cannot know that, 600 years from now, people will tell his story in dark rooms, late at night, as a way of falling asleep. He walks on. He arrives at the university. He learns the trivium and the quadrivium. He reads Galen and Avicenna. He passes his examinations. He earns his degree. He sets out, with his books and his instruments and his fur-lined robe, to practice the art he has learned. He becomes a doctor. He sees patients. He examines them. He prescribes regimens. He bleeds them and gives them tinctures and applies leeches to their arms. He visits the dying. He sits beside them. He prays with their families. He survives the plague, or he does not. He grows old, or he does not. His name is forgotten, almost entirely. Only the faintest traces remain, a few names in university records, a few prescriptions in archives, a few books in libraries. But he was real. He existed. He stood between his patients and complete ignorance, and he gave them what he could. He brought to the bedside the accumulated learning of 1,000 years. He did his slow, careful work, in a world that did not yet know what was wrong with it. That is what a doctor does. In any age. In every age. The candle has burned down. The night is deep. Somewhere, in a small stone house on a narrow street in a town whose name we have forgotten, a man in a long robe is closing his books for the evening. He is putting away his brass urine flask. He is blowing out the small tallow candle. He is going to bed. Tomorrow he will rise, and read, and see his patients, and do what he can. That is everything. The light is gone. Good night.